Today, we're going to talk about procurement reform. And I'm here with Soraya Correa, who's the Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and also a winner of the Presidential Rank Award for her innovation in procurement. So congratulations for that,
Thank you, sir.
Soraya.
Thank you very much, Steve.
I was there at those Presidential Rank Awards, and was pretty excited actually that actually got noticed and paid attention to, because as you know, sometimes mission support stuff doesn't get the recognition that it deserves.
True, very true.
So, part of the reason you got that award was the Innovation Lab for procurement. What is it you're trying to accomplish with the Innovation Lab?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing at the Department of Homeland Security to improve procurement. Because here's the reality that we work with. We can't wait for regulations to be changed. So we have to be innovative, we have to be creative, and we have to be practical because the mission needs to move forward. And we in the mission support function, that's literally what we do. We enable the mission every single day. So when I came in as the Chief Procurement Officer for the department, I decided to create what's called the Procurement Innovation Lab, or the PIL as we like to call it. And the purpose of the PIL is really one thing: to encourage our workforce to be a little less risk averse on the procurement side and be creative and innovative in how we conduct our acquisitions, from how we develop those solicitations, how we engage with industry, the business processes surrounding how we work with our customers, to how we evaluate proposals and how we communicate back with industry on debriefings, award selections, and even how we administer the contract. The idea is, let's go talk to the workforce, the people that do the work on a day-to-day basis, and see what creative ideas they have, what approaches they have, working within the confines of the FAR, within the four corners of the FAR, but to talk through what are the flexibilities that are available to us and how can we use those in a more productive and innovative way to promote efficiency, increase competition, enable those companies that might not otherwise want to do business with the government to be encouraged to come in and do business with the government, and ultimately to get the best possible solution for our customers delivered at the right time, in the right place, and in the right way. So that's really the goal of the Procurement Innovation Lab.
So what are some of the outcomes?
Oh, well, some of the outcomes are better procurements. In other words, greater confidence in the companies that we're selecting or the products that we're selecting that are used by our program offices. But the most important thing that I think has come about as a result of the Procurement Innovation Lab is the improved communication between the contracting officer, the program officer, and the legal counsel. Because it is extremely important that we remember that ultimately in procurement, we have two things we're trying to do. We got to deliver on a mission. We also have to comply with the regulations that govern us, because the regulations are about creating a fair process for the companies to participate. So we want to make sure that we're using the rules effectively and enabling the delivery of that mission. And how we can do that is through improved communications between the program officer and the contracting officer. To date, we've had like about 94 successful procurement projects. We've hosted over 50 webinars, because the concept behind the PIL is we're going to test the process. We're going to make sure that process works, or learn from what didn't work in that process. And then we invite that team to come in and host a webinar to educate the rest of the staff so that they understand what these techniques are and how they can use them. And through use, we continue to evolve these processes. And then we go out and train folks. We host what are called PIL boot camps, which is a training session where we bring in program officials, contracting officers, legal counsel, anybody who wants to participate, to learn about these techniques and how they work, and what are some of the pitfalls of the techniques, and what are some of the innovative approaches that we've adopted. The other thing that we're doing now is PIL coaching clinics. We're teaching people how to be PIL coaches, because that's really what we do in the PIL. We don't do the procurement. The procurement's done by the contracting officer and the program officials. They still run their project. What we do is coach them. And then we check in with them to make sure that we're constantly helping them get through the process and learning from them what's working, what's not.
Well, you picked up something that that I've seen, and having been in this town for well over 40 years working with agencies. the concept of the contracting officer and their relationship with the program manager. Because, many years ago, I saw that as a very, very tight relationship. They work together. And then for a while, I actually saw it split apart. And, program managers either deferred to or didn't engage with contracting officers and vice versa.
Mhm.
And I still see it a little bit today. And I'm not here to necessarily be critical of it, but I see a huge burden that's being placed on both parties by not working together across the government. You see the same?
I agree. And that's what I'm trying to encourage. I'm trying to encourage that communication. I like to joke around and say procurement's a team sport. It really is.
Mhm.
And the earlier that we can pull the team together, and I am a huge fan of good acquisition planning. And notice I said acquisition planning, not writing a document, about pulling a team together into a room and having a discussion and making sure that we all have a common understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve. What are our objectives? The biggest question that I always ask program managers when I was a contracting officer is, what is it that you need? How do you need it? When do you need it? Why do you need it? I need to understand it. And if I can understand it, I'm going to craft you a strategy, an approach that meets your needs. And if I understand the limitations that you're working with, right? Because there could be budget limitations, there could be industry limits, et cetera. If I understand that, I can bake that into the solution. So one of the things that I've done to try to improve that relationship, because I do believe it is a partnership and we all got to come together. And by the way, industry is a part of that partnership. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But what I've done to try to pull this together here at the Department of Homeland Security is a couple of years ago, I instituted a process that I call the Procurement Strategy Roadmap. And what that is, the PSR is a 2 to 5 page document where at the 50,000 foot level, and that's the way I like to describe it, the program officer and the contracting officer described for me those acquisitions that they are trying to put forth that require our review and approval at my level. And what I do is I bring to the table our CIO office, our program analysis risk management office, our financial officer if they're needed. I bring in our small business folks. I bring in my policy and oversight, my procurement innovation lab, and the legal counsel and the program officer and the contracting officer. And we have a discussion about the procurement, again, at the 50,000 foot level. Just want to understand what you're trying to do, what's your overarching strategy, and how we get you from there. And as a result of that discussion, what happens is your strategy is good. You've gotten the best advice from all the people that are probably going to criticize you later, right? But we all come together, have this discussion, help each other out, and then the contracting officer and the program officer can go off and accomplish their acquisition. And they can come back to us if they have any questions or they need any help. But the point is, by having this conversation, we bring the best minds together, we talk through it, we all understand each other, and the rest of the process goes a lot more smoothly. And I highlight that industry is a part of that, because a lot of times we run off and we do this thing we call market research. And the market research is based on trying to find data that's out there. How about, instead of just trying to find data that's out there, we bring in industry, engage them as early as possible. There's going to be 2 huge benefits from that. One, we're going to get input from the folks that are going to be doing this for you, right? The people that are going to bid the process, et cetera. What better insight can you get? But 2, we get information out to industry early so that they can plan for bidding or not bidding on this project. Industry will self-select themselves out if they know what you're asking for, if they have a good understanding. So by engaging industry and making them a part of our planning process, bringing them in early, we now have all the right players together coming to the right decision. And I don't know how we can fail. I really don't
know. I think by involving the contractor community in a fair and open way, you can get a lot. And I think most contractors are trying to help and support the process. And they also want to know if this is something they shouldn't engage with and not spend time on. And they're entitled to do that. It's interesting that, sometimes about 30 years ago, I remember this contracting officer who would always be invited to a program discussion about what they're trying to accomplish. And he would sit there and say, tell me what you're trying to do, and I'll tell you how to do it legally.
Exactly.
Right? But you need, for example, you can't decide whether there should be firm fixed price or T&M without a discussion between both parties.
Exactly.
Now, one of the tenets of category management was actually having procurement officers who are skilled and knowledgeable about the subject area being procured.
Mhm.
Do you find that as a barrier, or do you try to do some of that in maybe certain important areas in the department?
So certainly, I think when a procurement officer or a contracting officer is knowledgeable in the industry or the commodity or the service that they're trying to buy, certainly that's going to go a lot smoother. That doesn't mean that you have to be an expert at it. In fact, I would say that in my career, I've brought a little bit of everything. I came from the ground up. So I started as a GS4 clerk typist, believe it or not, before I came into procurement. And throughout my career in procurement, I've bought a multitude of things, whether it was research and development, construction, IT. I wasn't always the expert, but I also knew where to find experts to help me out. I think the more well-versed you are in the commodity or service that you're going to buy, you're probably going to be a little bit more successful. But here's the deal. If you're engaging in the right level of communication, if you build that good relationship with your customer as well as with industry, believe it or not, you're going to learn. You're going to get the right information. One of the reasons I like bringing industry in is because industry will also not only bring us ideas for our particular procurement, they'll tell us what they've seen across the federal government in other agencies, or what they've seen at the state and local level. And here's a real great hint that I like to drop off to people sometimes, when I'm talking about why we bring in industry, they do this with each other. Industry buys a lot of the services and commodities that we buy as a federal government. They buy it from each other. They share services, they do data centers, they do all that stuff for each other. So we can learn a lot from them and pick up some really good techniques and information, and maybe even navigate through some of the pitfalls that are inherent to some of the things that we're going to do because they've already lived it. So that's the reason that I really encourage that. And I really say, yeah, it's good if you know the commodity or service, and we try to provide that kind of training. But do I think you have to be an expert at it? No, you just have to know how to find the right people that know it and listen. One of the things that I love to tell my staff is it's all about communications. I always say that relationships are all about communication. And there's two pieces to that communication. It's what you say, but what you hear, what you listen to. And we can learn a lot from our program officials. And I've never met a program officer that wasn't willing to have a conversation when they know you're trying to help them out. And so I think it's about us. It behooves us to go out and say, hey, I'm here. Let's talk about your program. Let's talk about what you got coming down the pipe. Let me understand what you want.
So you don't walk in saying, no, now what's your question?
Never. In fact, one of my philosophies when I was head of contracting, when I've led branches as a supervisor, and my staff hears this all the time, it's not your job to say no. It's my job to say no. If it really comes to a no, that should come from me. It's your job to see what we can do for you. The answer is never no. The answer is maybe not that way. Let's talk about it and see how we can do this.
Do you think there's an education gap with the procurement workforce, just generally across the government? And I want to extend that a little bit. I was recently talking with an IG who was telling me that a program office in their department had reached out to 3, 4, 5 contractors to talk about something they're trying to do so they can get a concept around it. And the IG said, absolutely not. You are not allowed to do that. You just put out RFPs, period. You're just not allowed to do that. And I've also seen contracting officers in one agency said, sure, you can do that. And the same exact situation, another saying, no, the FAR doesn't allow for that. How do we address that across the government?
So certainly training is always necessary, and we have to adapt our training to the environment that we work in. People don't have the luxury of spending a whole day in a training class or even a whole week in a training class. That's the reality of the world that we live in, right? We have limited resources, and we also have better capabilities to deliver training. So one of the things that I focus on is a lot of just-in-time training, and what I've tried to push at our Homeland Security Acquisition Institute. Let's have our standard training courses, for people to be certified. Got those. But let's create a lot of just-in-time training so that people can kind of come in and learn what they need to know when they need to know it, such as market research. How about a nice 1 hour, 2 hour session on market research? But to answer the question, I am very fond of saying to program officials, nowhere in the FAR does it say, I've not found the language, and I've been looking and I've studied it for 40 years. Nowhere in the FAR does it say that we can't talk to industry once the PR is received. That's a myth. OFPP wrote a bunch of memos about that. What the FAR tells, right? The Mythbusters. What the FAR tells us is that we cannot give one vendor an unfair competitive advantage over another vendor. In other words, we need to treat vendors in an equal and fair manner. So we make sure that information is accessible to the vendors if we're sharing information about what we're trying to do. That doesn't say you can't talk to them. And it doesn't say that market research is only done by the contracting officer. Certainly a program office can do market research, but we need to make sure that we give them the right tools and educate them on how to do that market research so they don't get themselves in trouble. Finally, what I also like to say is make sure you have your disclaimer at the beginning of any session where you're talking to vendors to say, this is market research. All we're doing is trying to understand what you do, how you do it, learn from you, but there's no solicitation here. There's no RFP. An RFP comes out from the contracting office.
There may not be one.
Exactly.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Well, I find, contractors are certainly willing to invest themselves, most of them, because they want the government to succeed. So what do you, and I'll share with you mine, but what do you hear from the contractor community in terms of what they'd like to see differently?
Yeah. So actually, I hear a lot from the contractor communities because one of the things that I've also done as the Chief Procurement Officer at the department, from the moment I came in, I have encouraged working with industry, talking to industry throughout the process and even before the process begins, because I do think that a lot of times the conversation starts when we're doing the procurement. So I've done something a little bit different, and I'm happy to report that a lot of other federal agencies are starting to do this. I created a series of conversations with industry. It's an initiative that I stood up when I came in. I call it Acquisition Innovations in Motion. And in fact, the PIL was an offshoot of that, but also is about how we engage with industry. And I said, why don't we start talking to industry about business, about how we do our business, how we work together, what we do well and what we don't do well. Let's learn from one another. And so the first one is the Strategic Industry Conversation, which is an annual event where I invite industry in and I bring senior officials of the agency to talk about strategically what we're trying to do. What are the challenges that we're confronting? What are some of the problem sets that we're trying to solve? And how can industry help us? So it's a very 50,000 foot level conversation. Typically, we open with the deputy secretary or the secretary providing opening remarks, and then we have assistant secretaries, program managers, and we really have a multitude of sessions to educate industry on how to do business with the Department of Homeland Security. For those who don't know how to work with us or haven't really worked with us before, we try to help them understand the rules, the small business rules, et cetera. The point is to have that engaging conversation about understanding each other's business. The second type of event that I host is called Reverse Industry Days. These have become very, very popular, and other agencies are starting to do them. Reverse Industry Day, we work with industry associations to present to us. We become the audience, and they come in and talk to us about their business processes and how they look at our solicitations, how they arrive at decisions to compete, not compete, write a proposal, what it takes to write a proposal, What are the decision-making processes that they go through? And at each of these events, we always have small businesses, consulting companies, large businesses, mid-tiers, sometimes even academic institutions participate. Because the idea is, let us understand industry. Let's understand how they operate. Let's understand what motivates them, what inspires them to participate in our procurement programs. And then the third event that I host is called Acquisition Innovation Roundtables. And the idea there is equal numbers of industry association representatives and government representatives to talk about a particular area, how we do requests for information, security clearance processing. Talk through and make sure that we're speaking to each other in terms that understand one another, and see if we can improve the process by learning from one another. So my goal with the SIC, the RID, and the AIR, I love acronyms, SIC, RID, AIR, is to make sure that we're engaging with industry long before we put out a solicitation.
Most of the things that I hear from the contractor community writ large is, let us in early and let us help you shape it, and talk to as many companies as you want. And or they'll say, boy, I don't know who put this statement of work together. It seems like it's been cut and paste from 5 different sources, and there's all these conflicts in there. So you'll see a lot of that. Companies typically, for the most part, don't mind if they think it's wired for someone, because that'll tell them just to stay away. Maybe you don't want that,
right?
And you have to make that known. But companies just naturally look for that, because they've got to put B&P dollars into doing that. So there are those kinds of things that become important to them when they're trying to make these decisions. The other is set asides, which nobody really complains about. They think that's fine and it's good program. Large companies, the very large, the mega companies, as I call them, feel that they're not really touched that. They can still bid and win and do the work. The disadvantaged companies feel that they have a play, and that's great. I call the tweener companies, that they feel get kind of cut out. There's too many of these things that, boy, I could do that, but it's a set aside, and I can't play in that. Or I can tell they really want a big company in there. And so I call them those tweener companies that feel like they get cut out a lot. So those are some of the things that I hear, and companies who really want to make a contribution in government.
Yeah. So the tweeners, as you call them, they call themselves mid-tiers, actually, is what they actually call themselves. And we've been talking about them for years. Because there is a valid concern there. I hear what they're saying. These are companies that typically have graduated from small business programs, and they're in that mid-level where they're not the real big companies, but they're also not small enough to participate in set-asides. One of the things that I would say is, generally speaking, there is a lot of room for them to play. They just have to think about how they play, right? I think that they can compete with the large companies. I really do. I think sometimes companies don't think strategically about how to play in that market, right? Like how to partner with one another, because 2 mid-tiers could probably outdo a really big company. I didn't mean to give away a strategy there, but that's potential strategy, right? So I think companies have to be a little bit more creative. I think there is a valid concern, and they should be talking to the Small Business Administration and also to the appropriate oversight committees about how maybe there is a play for them, right? How do you go from being a small business and graduating? How do you get indoctrinated into the process so that you don't feel like you're left out there twisting in the wind? We try to be as fair and reasonable as we can be. We're in the world of best-in-class contracting now, where we have a lot of these best-in-class contracts. We've been doing strategic sourcing at the Department of Homeland Security since as far back as 2004 is when we really started on a lot of our strategic sourcing programs. And in all of our strategic sourcing programs, one of the things that we've done is made sure that we've carved out those lanes for the small businesses as well as all the other companies, so that there's always play there for both. It's a process that's made us very successful. I don't know if I've ever shared with you that at the Department of Homeland Security for 11 years in a row, we've gotten an A on the SBA scorecard. And that's not by accident. That's because we really think about how we work with small businesses, how we bring them in, how we enable them to participate, but how we work with industry in general. We really think about that a lot. And I'm happy to say, we're like, I think it's the 5th largest agency buying power. And yet we meet or exceed our goals every single year. And I always tell people that's not by accident. That's because we're consciously out here working with industry, inviting industry in, teaming small businesses with large businesses, talking to those mid-tiers and making sure that they know what's coming down the pike, promoting competition and promoting the participation of all the groups. Can I solve the problem of mid-tiers? No, but make me queen for a day, I probably could come up with a really good solution.
So one last thing, you mentioned earlier as an example, procuring RPA AI services, those and helping procurement officers to learn about those things so they can properly engage. What about using those advanced technologies for procurement? What are you doing? What are you seeing happening?
So I'm a huge fan of automation for procurement. I think that there are a lot of things that we do that can be automated for the purposes of enabling our folks to be a little bit more efficient. I'm a huge fan of what I know thus far about artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotic process automation. I think those are fantastic tools that we can bring into our environment and eliminate some of those tedious tasks that we have to do where we're out researching databases. In fact, our Procurement Innovation Lab, working in conjunction with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and several other agencies, we've teamed to use artificial intelligence to improve how we get our data out of the contractor performance assessment reporting system, or CPARS. That's past performance information. The database is voluminous. It has a lot of good data in there, but a CO has to go in there and search for data. And what I want to do is use artificial intelligence to cull that data and bring back information to the CO in a usable format so that the CO can do an analysis of that data to make smart decisions. I don't want COs sitting there going through tedious spreadsheets and databases trying to pull information. I want them to get a report, information, data that they can use to make the analytical assessments. So a huge fan of artificial intelligence. CPARS AI is a project that the Procurement Innovation Lab is leading, but like I said, it's a partnership with other federal agencies, as well as the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and industry, because we're bringing in industry to bring us that solution. RPA, I think you could use robotic process automation to do a lot of the research activities that we have to do. When we're going out and doing things like market research or looking for information about new companies, especially companies that we don't know, or even pulling information out of the various databases so that we can create our responsibility determinations. So there's a multitude of uses for robotic process automation, and we're working very closely with our Chief Information Officer, as well as other federal agencies, to learn from one another and work together. Last but not least, when I say automation, I think about all the tools that are out there. One of the things that we did, and it fits into this environment that we're working in now, we implemented an electronic contract filing system, believe it or not. Last fall, we started working on it. We ran a pilot test working with all of our components. And my goal there was, why do we need paper files? Why don't we create electronic contract files? It makes it a lot easier for us for all the functions that we have to perform. It makes it easier for our employees to telework. Believe it or not, I wasn't even thinking about the pandemic when I came up with that, but I was thinking about how do we make the life of the contracting officer easier? How do we give them access to their information in a much more proactive and productive way? And how do we enable them to create better contract files and be able to respond to things a little bit faster? Because it's a lot easier researching in an automated fashion than in a paper fashion. We have to answer a lot of FOIA requests. We get a lot of FOIA requests about contract files. We have to pull together a lot of reports. Sometimes we have to share those files with the IG or the GAO because they're doing their reviews. So what better way to do that than if we have these files electronically? So we initiated this process. We're still, in the growing phase of it, but all the components are participating. We're getting our data in there. And of course, the pandemic put us in a situation where necessity became the approach. But I think automation can enable us to be more efficient. It will never take the place of the decision-making process that we really have to go through. But it certainly can get us a lot of good information in the right place, in our hands, so that we can make the right decision. Finally, automation will help us train. Through automation, I can get to more people. Today, when I hosted my Chief Procurement Officer Symposium, which was really a training symposium, I was able to reach hundreds of people across the country to talk to my procurement. I talk to my procurement community across DHS twice a year through town halls, and I answer their questions, and they get to hear from me what are the initiatives, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve. So I think automation is going to improve our lives, especially in the area of training. At our Homeland Security Acquisition Institute, we have not missed a beat on training. When this pandemic hit, we said, fine, we're going to start flipping all these courses to as best we can into an automated fashion. And we figured out how to even keep them interactive. So I think automation can help us be more efficient, more productive. It helps our people be more focused on the parts that they have to work on, that decision-making part. And that to me is exciting, because when I talk about procurement, I never talk about writing a contract. I talk about delivering solutions, solving problems, teaming with those program offices to deliver on the most important thing we do, and that is mission. And that excites me.
If you were the head of OFPP or queen for the day, what would be the top 3 things you'd want to address in procurement to help our government?
So first and foremost, address the workforce, the training, the recruiting, how we manage that workforce, how we encourage them, inspire them, and motivate them to be more creative and more innovative. The second thing that I would approach is making sure that we really understand the flexibilities that exist in our environment, that we don't confine ourselves and try to think that the Federal Acquisition Regulation is a cookbook, or for lack of a better term, a guide. It really is there to tell us how to keep ourselves out of trouble. It's not there to tell us how to do everything. And then the third thing I would address is that teamwork, making sure that we're bringing in the peers that work with the procurement team to get the job done. Because I can educate the contracting officer and the program officer all I want, and those two will work well together. But if I don't bring all the other elements in, the CFO, the CIO, the logistics manager, the test and evaluation manager, and my industry partners, and all those people that play, then it's all for naught, because then they're out of the loop. So we need to bring that whole team together, engage in that regular recurring communication, and understand one another, and build those relationships long before we have to actually write the procurement. And I do believe we'll have successful procurements. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention protests, right? Because everybody loves protests. What I tell my staff is, don't worry about getting a protest. You're probably going to get it. Focus on writing a really good procurement. You're probably going to win the protest, and you might even eliminate the protest.
And you'll do just fine.
That's really
Soraya, thank you. Soraya Correa, Chief Procurement Officer, the Department of Homeland Security. There's a lot to do out there with this, and it's procurement, you can say, is almost as old as dirt, right? But there's still a long way to go, and I'm glad you're at the helm. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for this great opportunity. It's a pleasure talking to you always.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us today. You can see all our podcast episodes by going to centerforoe.com, our YouTube channel, or any of the major podcast channels out there. You can also contact me at steve@centerforoe.com if you have any comments or want to suggest any episodes. Our next episode will be with Dan Chenick, the Executive Director of the IBM Center for Business. Dan and I are going to talk about budget reform and the many, many pieces of that across government that need to be addressed. See you next time.